Hey, good afternoon, everybody out there. It's John Ross here. Good to see you out there, folks. It's 12/18, 2020. Got a special guest with us today. Uh, Pastor David Swanson is going to be with us, and we're thankful for him. I just wanted to say, I just remembered today, for 72 years ago, my parents were married on this day. In 1948, up in Wisconsin, Pastor Swanson, he was our covenant or free church. I don't know who did it. They were in both, so I don't know who did that wedding. But it was in way up north in Wisconsin by Grantsburg, Wisconsin. And I've heard it was snowing and everything up there, and we
I'm
could
sure.
get that here too. It's on this 18th, one more week till Christmas, and I'm really privileged to have Dr. Doctor. It's
Definitely not.
it flows. It's going to be there, but Reverend David Swanson is with the D, I guess. D, Doctor. I don't know. Anyway, Reverend David Swanson's with us. We're so happy that he could join us. He's pastor in Chicago at the New Community Covenant Church at Bronzeville. And how long you been pastor there, Pastor David? How long you been there about?
It's been a little over 10 years now. We actually planted the church a little over 10
That's
years
what I
ago.
thought. You're a church planter guy.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get you to plant one out in Aurora here. We need I
Yeah.
think a good. I I appreciate so much on the covenant of the way they're show the gospel, and they've changed quite a bit from just being. For some of you who don't know much about the covenant denomination, it's like the Free Church denomination. They come from Swedish backgrounds, and this church in Elgin and out in the country there was once called. It's now called Country Covenant, but at one time it was called Swedish Covenant. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they had that in Batavia too.
Mm-hmm.
They all used the Swedish on it, and anyway, that's a sidetrack thing here. I'm just sorry about that. But so anyway, Pastor, you've been there 10 years and you are a planter. That's very interesting operation and doing that. And you've been very diligent. It doesn't come overnight, these things, I know. And he's also, it's a recent book here. He's the author of Rediscipling the White Church from cheap diversity to true solidarity. I'm going to show that book cover here. 1 second here. This is an InterVarsity book. Did that come out this year? Is that right? I forgot now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in May.
Okay, that's how it was because I read it pretty early. And yeah. And so you can get this at Amazon or IV Press. That's InterVarsity Press sells this book. Or you can do like I did. You can get it in the library and read it through online stuff. But it's a very interesting book. And that's why we're having Pastor David on here. And I just wanted to talk to him about things happening. I want to get out my shovel, Pastor David, and I'm going to stop the snowflake. I can do that. I'm like Elijah. I can pray. Snow, go away. Oh, just
Very impressive.
that. We can bring it back too if we. Anyway, I don't want to belittle that. I'm sorry about that, God. I was just so it just came to me. Just sorry. So if there's a bolt of lightning by the end of the show here, you know why it was, Pastor David. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, we got the snow removed. He's got an office downtown. I mean, near the lake, so he's going to get that snow. He's going to get some snow here soon, probably. So your book discusses, how the white church can. I would use the word sort of gradually or just build into it to get to more a true whole gospel or a whole thinking about the community of God.
Mm-hmm.
since the election and other things, how you got any thoughts on how this is progressing? You think the church can we do this? Can the church do this? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds about that. I think there's lots of reasons to be hopeful, at least from my vantage point, over the past 6 months as we've been quarantined and seen these very public instances of racial trauma and unrest. I've had so many conversations with white ministry leaders who are wanting to think about discipleship. Just yesterday, I had in the morning a conversation with Young Life leaders up in the Detroit area, and then last night with a group of folks from a church in Portland, Oregon. And so all over the country, there seems to be this shift where white Christians are saying, hey, listen, we have a role to play here. That we don't get to outsource this reconciliation stuff. And so I'm very encouraged by the way that some of us at least are grappling with this. The other side, the less optimistic side, is I do think we're seeing some entrenchment. We're seeing the impact of what I would call partisan discipleship that has so formed us that anything outside of our own partisan group we label as fake news or not true, and we're almost impermeable to hearing different perspectives. And the really sad thing about that for those of us who are Christians is that means we're not listening to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And given the segregated nature of American Christianity, that often means that white Christians are not listening to sisters and brothers of color. And so that's the heartbreak. That's where the work is to be done. And but thankfully, there have been some examples of the other as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about. I think what's this one term is critical racial
critical race theory.
Race theory. It's basically saying we got to change our history, right? Or look at history a little different and look at everything through history more.
Yeah, I'm not a critical race theory expert.
No, I'm not
myself.
either. I'm just heard this term and everybody gets all upset about it.
Absolutely,
I don't know much about it.
Well, so here's the thing that I've noticed is that anytime historically where there seems to be an advancement of equality for Black people in particular in this country, then there's always a boogeyman that is presented that gives usually white people a reason not to support
you mean
that.
Somewhat, maybe a little slower down thing or something to latch back?
I think, for example, in previous generations, it was the social gospel. If you were more,
been still used, but that's
right. But that was the boogeyman, right? That we can't go in that direction because that's the social gospel. And then it was things like liberalism. If you cared about racial justice, then you were labeled a liberal, and you didn't really care about the gospel.
There's certain pastors that still use this type. I won't.
Absolutely.
I won't. It's a name after a general. I think there was a General MacArthur or whatever. But anyway, there's a guy that.
But these things, it's the same song, second verse, right?
It is. I mean,
they pop up in different iterations.
I had Dr. Bigot on Wednesday mentioned something. I think we have to be truthful about history. There's good history and there's bad history. And he was mentioning Dr. King and some of the things that weren't good there were Dr. King. And okay, we lost. And we'll be right back here in a second here, I'm sure. We'll wait. We lost. He's back. He's going to be back. What happened? I'll get him back online here. I don't know what happened, but we lost him a moment there.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened.
I don't know where I was going with that, but I was just going to say about here's where I was going. I remember about history. We were always trying to do outreach. My parents were, and I remember in the we were doing another church thing, and we were sort of like a Bible study. And this one lady who was, I don't know how she got to teach at Moody Bible Institute because they didn't allow women really do anything. But that's past. Well, anyway, she was big on Dr. King, FBI reports about him being this and that, communist and other things. There's one or two things that might have been true, but his basic message, and we're all that way. We're all fallen sinners. The basic message was we need to change, in our racial understandings, and it's been a problem for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's always interesting to me who we give a pass to and who we don't give a pass to.
Oh, right. No, there's people that, yes, you're right.
It betrays something about our own assumptions and our own priorities, right?
A guy can say he's going to grab somebody, some woman, right. and it's locker room talk, and stuff like or quote, he can be married or have 3 wives, but if you do this, no, you're a bad person.
Yeah, I think oftentimes our scapegoats probably reveal more about ourselves, right? Than than we think they might.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about history and how we look at history, and that's part of what you're trying to do there. We got to start looking at our history and our past and our church history. And when I went to, I was at Wheaton there. I don't remember if we had any too much about minority churches or African American experience. It was always between Catholics and Lutheran Protestant type thing. That's all we talked about. We didn't, maybe a little about Calvin, of course. I got to bring that in there, being Presbyterian, but I don't remember anything about African American history. The church history and how that and the Civil War and that. I think it was just totally not talked about, really.
I don't think that's exceptional. I think that has been the norm for most higher education for a long time, and also a lot of church education. I think that this is unfortunate, and it doesn't need to be. I actually just finished reading a book a couple of days ago. It's called "A Multitude of Peoples: Engaging Ancient Christianity's Global Identity." And it's by Vince Bantu, who teaches at Fuller Seminary. And it's just, all it is he's just making the point that global Christianity is an ancient phenomenon. It's not necessarily a recent missionary phenomenon. And he's showing these ancient roots of Christianity. Well, most of us didn't grow up knowing that story. Most of us, we thought Jerusalem, Judea, Europe, and then America. And that's not the full story, and we miss out on so much, right? Both for our own personal faith, right? Where our own personal faith cannot be nurtured by the global saints who went before us, but then we have some of our own stereotypes that don't get disturbed because we just have this one particular vision of our faith.
Yeah, I think some of it is we don't even. I mean. Protestant, sometimes we almost forget the 1500 years up to Luther. I mean, it's just sort of like I've caught up more on that in the last 20 years than before. I never really had much at all. I don't remember much of my covenant catechism. I don't think even had about, maybe it did, I don't know, but I know in college and grad school I didn't have much in that way. It's mostly after Luther we talk about Protestants. And that's hard to believe, 1500 years, and then we forget about another covenant person that I know. I read Dr. Ra's book on lament, and I think he's got another book too about this idea of the discovery. What was it called?
It's called the Doctrine of Discovery.
Doctrine of Discovery. And I thought that plays quite a bit into a lot of our thinking here, too.
Yeah. So Dr. Soong-Chan Rah co-wrote that book with a Native American author named Mark Charles. And what they do is basically illuminate this area of history that most of us don't know about, called the doctrine of discovery, which is this idea that really was birthed out of these papal bulls that
Right.
were issued by different popes, giving European superpowers at the time the ability to claim land in the name of Christ and to evangelize by any means necessary the occupants of those lands, and this produced then an entire legal system that said this land was free for the taking for whoever got there first, for the claiming. It ends up being a way of kind of dehumanizing indigenous people who had been taking care of these lands for a long time. But the crazy thing is that this doctrine gets woven into the American legal system and has been cited by the Supreme Court as recently as just a few years ago.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that part of it. I didn't realize that part of the story. Yeah.
So that's the way history works, right? These things happen and they work their way into our imaginations and into our status quo and just to how we assume that the world works. And it's only once we start to see where this stuff comes from that we go, well, that's not neutral at all. There was a purpose behind that, and a purpose that maybe we're not okay with.
Yeah, and a lot of this current things that what you're trying to do with your book here, and trying to make the white church your book talks about, if I remember correctly, you were talking about how we do things just in small ways can be big things to lead to more. Inviting pastors to come and speak, or looking at the Lord's Supper, communion in a broader way, or you had some other examples. I can't remember them all, but that's just bringing the outside to the church. That's basically what you're doing. You're trying to expand the church's thinking of who they are instead of just that group that's in that building or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think, to stick with this theme of history for a second, when
Right.
you have been, when you have assumed one version of history for your entire life,
right,
it's a jolt to the system when you realize that there were some things that were left out, some important things that were left out. And I think for many of us who are white and who are Christian, that has been the case. We have assumed that race is just sort of this neutral thing that just has always existed, and that's just not the case. And we can get into that, but the point here is that that for those of us who pastor and serve in ministry, the jolt to the system is not always going to be the best way forward. The jolt to the system often, causes people to run away with their hair on fire, right?
Yes. And you might lose your congregation or something or whatever.
Right. And so the question is, what does it look like over the course of time to redirect the ship into a more truthful direction? What does it look like to disciple people so that over the course of their lives, they are following Jesus more and more closely? There's times where we need the jolt to the system. The prophetic voice is absolutely necessary. We must always tell the truth as Christian people. But at the end of the day, our goal is actual transformation. And so that's where the discipleship stuff comes in, I think.
Yeah, we got talking with Dr. Becote the other day, and I was bringing up my Stephen Bible studies about Stephen and how he brought up history, which didn't go over too well with his Jewish people there. I mean, we know that Stephen was the first church martyr, and Paul was right there with doing that. But he brought up all these things and just put it right there. And sometimes I also brought up to Dr. Becote, there's studies that show when you read more of the Bible, you'll be more uncomfortable, basically.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this is the thing that cracks me up about critical race theory. People say, "Oh, it's this very radical agenda," and
okay,
and we got and I think, well, have you read about this guy named Jesus? because his
No,
agenda
he
was
came
pretty
to
radical
upset
too.
history. He did. He came to upset history. He did.
Yeah. So it makes me laugh a little bit when I see people getting, so nervous about something that they maybe have not ever, even read that much about. I think, well, let's just start with the Bible, because boy, Jesus ought to make all of us uncomfortable, right? I mean, the
No,
stuff that Jesus teaches.
I think he should be make. I think, and I think Dr. Burcote said this. I'm giving him a lot of credit for all this, but I think he did say this. But he was basically saying we're always got to be thinking. There's always got to be attention. That's what he was saying basically in our Christianity. There's always going to be this type of, we're going to be learning more and have to
Yeah.
come around more to where God's calling us more. We always got to be doing that.
And that's spiritual maturity, right? I mean, this is what it means to grow up in our faith over time, is that we are able to encounter new things. We are able to encounter hard truths. We're able to learn new parts of our history that might be uncomfortable, and not be shaken by those things, because we have a foundation in Jesus that is strong enough.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And another term is out there. Just briefly, we can bash this around, or whatever you want to call it. Truth decay. It's like my teeth. I got problems with that. It's not decay, but it's other problems. But truth decay is a play on words there, but it is somewhat, the truth has been sort of, I don't know, it's just gone basically in a lot of things lately.
Yeah.
People don't, it's your own truth too, so much too. It's individualized truth too. And some of it was just about what we were talking about. It's just, we don't want to hear these things. So we just,
Yeah.
we label them different ways to discourage people from thinking about our sins or where we're at.
Right. The ironic thing for me about this is having grown up in somewhat evangelical spaces, I often was warned about relativism,
Yeah,
and
that's the term. That's the term. My philosophy
yet,
is not as good as you. I remember that's the term, right?
yeah,
That's the correct term. Yeah.
and yet, what we've seen over recent years is how that fear of relativism has seemed to kind of come back to us, right?
And
Where if it doesn't fit with our desires, with our plans,
yeah.
then it's fake news. And boy, this is disappointing. This is for people who follow the Savior, who claims to be the embodiment of the truth.
Right.
It's sad to see when our witness has been compromised on that. And I understand, like, we are bombarded with information. I understand the social media world. I understand that there are massive interests out there that thrive on our fear and dissension. So I get that's what we're up against. But if we cannot come back to some basic facts, this is really troublesome. I think that one of the antidotes to this is to reason together in local communities. That so much of what we see right now is happening in online spaces and media spaces. But what about the flesh and blood, the incarnate communities where we can reason together, where we can share our experiences together? This is what our churches should be, right? Our churches ought not to be monolithic, everybody thinking the same thing or voting the same way. But they should be the place that we are committed to understanding the truth together.
Well, I want them to vote one way, but we won't talk about that.
No, well, you don't just vote for the president, right?
I understand quite what you're saying.
You got to vote for the school board member too, right? We can
I
think about
understand
that.
quite what you're saying, but yeah, and I'm pretty confident we're going to have a new president, and even though it looks some days I wonder if it's going to really happen. It should happen, but after this, what's going to be for people who realize, hey, maybe that wasn't the truth there. And how do we address some of these issues that way? And should the church be the one addressing it, or is it the media, the secular media? And it makes me wonder, and then you wonder back about to the Germany situation, and did the church, I don't know if necessarily should compare it, but how did the church react to some of these things that were said
Yeah.
by the Nazi regime there and stuff? How do we?
Yeah.
It's it's very deep, but it needs to be thought of. And very few. I mean, you're one, and Dr. Begall. There's not too many out there really discussing the future here that way. I think we got to start planning and how we're going to do this, or how. I think your one idea is good, to have more dialogues with people. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that we can't outsource this to the media. But I think this is what we've often done in more recent years. So we have our preferred media sources that align with our expression of faith and our partisan politics, and so we let those media outlets speak on our behalf, and we line up our talking points behind those different media sources. The church ought to be an alternative community. It ought to be within the world, being salt and light to the world, and yet existing as a city on a hill, so that it can maintain its brilliance in the midst of our society. And I'm nervous that we've lost some of that. That in so closely identifying with different partisan movements, that
Right.
we've lost that alternativeness that ought to mark our Christian communities. And so that for me is what I want to reclaim. That we are nurturing the Christian community that again exists in society for the good of society, but does have a distinctiveness to it, so that we do tell the truth with each other, that we do reason well together around the scriptures, that we are committed to lifting Jesus up above all else. And again, I believe that'll benefit the whole of society, but it's also always going to put us a little bit out of step, and we're never going to find any media source that represents our views perfectly, because we are always going to be a little bit out of step.
Yeah, and I've been trying to do things, press releases, other things, trying with the media in the past, and this is somewhat what this idea is too, of this, what we're doing here online. But the major news people they don't cover religion. They cut it out. I mean, my local paper had a religion section.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Tribune had something. Sun Times had people. It's only about one newspaper in the country, I think it's in Dallas, that has actually a full religion page.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these people in the secular media, there's Christians there, I know there are, but they do not have as much understanding, I don't think, of the religion, how it plays and how it should
Right.
help and be a source for light for them.
Yeah. Yeah. But this has always been the Christian challenge, right? I was reading recently about the Justin Martyr, I think, very, very early on in church history. And he's an apologist. He's an apologist to the emperor, trying to help the empire understand these weird Christians, right? And explain who they are. So I think that, I love good religion reporting. I do wish there were more of it, just like you were mentioning. And yet I also think that this is just part of what it means to be a Christian, is that we will always be a little misinterpreted. And this is the lament, right? That what we've seen in recent years is Christians wanting to be so cozy with power, wanting to be within the halls of the palace, right?
Right.
And willing to sacrifice so much truth in order to be there. I fear like that's when our witness is compromised. So I would rather us be a little out of step and misunderstood, but still have a powerful and clarion witness, than to have made so many compromises in order to be close to power.
I know. I don't know how many years it's been since Clinton. I think they've always had some, in these administrations, have had somewhat of a faith liaison, or I don't know, advisory councils, or different. They've had different labels for them, but I think Biden's going to do that too. And I know Obama did, and Trump did something too. Some are more broad and some are more narrow on who they bring in, but they've always tried to put faith with the some way to get, but in some way that's good too. We want to give some input from the faith community to our government,
For
but
sure.
like you're saying, it doesn't have to be like we sell the whole thing down to.
Right. Right. Yeah, we have to be willing to walk away. There's a really good book called Liberty to the Captives, written by Pastor Raymond Rivera, who's in the Bronx. And he says that Christians, we need to understand that we're always in a situation of exile. And there's times when we will be called to the palace, like a
Okay,
Daniel, right? Like, and you give an authority, or a Nehemiah.
or
You have a
Joseph.
seat at the table, like a Joseph. And then there's going to be other times where you're Elijah, or you're an Isaiah or a Jeremiah, and you're thrown down the well. And he says the really important thing for us is to discern the times and the moments really well. And what does faithfulness? It's not a one size fits all. Things change, moments shift. So what is faithful? And sometimes we can walk right into the White House and sit at the table and plan something. And then other times we're gonna have to stand up from that table and walk away because the cost is too high to our
Right,
faith, the
right.
compromise too great.
Yeah, those are, and as we said several times here about our faith always going to be growing, and that's what we got to build with the church. And I think that's what your book is trying to do, is giving us some new hopes for our community and for the church to relook at topics that they should be looking at it. I don't know why they're not looking at it, but let's get back looking and how we kind of redisciple, or let's teach or train, and how we can do that in the white church. I think that could be said for every church too. Actually, I mean, this type of thinking is just not American. I think Pastor David. I think we always got to. I think the whole world. I mean, globally, we all need that. All churches need to rethink and just repractice Jesus all the time and relearn Jesus and how we can learn and be better with him. I
Amen.
want to thank you so much. You got any other thoughts you want to close out with, or we can?
No, this has been great. Thanks for having me. And
Yeah, thank you. And remember this book, you can get it at Amazon or Ivy Press and other sources too. I'm sure there's other sources too. Because we're getting near the end here, we're going to bring back the snow,
there it is.
and it's. I'm getting you ready, Pastor David, for that lake effect
That's
snow
right.
that you're
That's
going to
right.
get one of these days. I don't know
Uh,
when, but here's a couple of just quick announcements. The VNA in Aurora, and I'm sure there's in Chicago, there's doing things like this too. Flu shots and COVID-19 testing. These items are free, and there's drive-through at the Highland Avenue in Aurora, and call for a COVID test appointment, 630-892-8385, 892-8385. And if you're into bell ringing, the Salvation Army was on a few days ago, and they told me that nationally they're down 30% on their what's happening. And they got an online sign up to do bell ringing. It's anywhere in the United States, so you can. It's called Register to Ring. So if you want to do some bell ringing in the next few days here, and before it snows and gets colder yet, I've done this bell ringing when it's really cold. And so, anyway, we're going to see you on Monday. We're working on that guest for Monday. We always keep working on that front. It's something else. And I'll be at 5. We'll be back, Lord willing. And so I just want to thank Pastor David there again for coming by and just visiting. And just remember his book there, and remember him and his ministry there in Chicago. And we just appreciate him so much. So all I'm going to say right now is God bless out there, and we'll see you Monday. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.